Cardinal Syn in the war-ravaged bloodlands, where the story tells tales of centuries of death, violence, and chaos. The constant warring of the 5 clans is finally put to an end when a nomadic angel, a sand seeker only known as the Wanderer, holding aloft his fantastical book of knowledge, he brought unity to the lands. Decades of peace followed, until the night the Wanderer gathered the leaders of each clan and before his departure bestowed upon them 5 mysterious scrolls. However, war soon retook the lands. Before complete annihilation was inevitable, a mysterious robed woman appeared, bearing the sigil of the Wanderer, ended the conflict and turned their scrolls into 3 magically inscripted swords. This woman was Syn.
Let the grand tournament begin.
With the gauntlet laid, the clans were to gather their champions, and they participated in battles that test their strength, courage, and mortality, seeking out only the worthy. This is Cardinal Syn.
Cardinal Syn released in 1998 and was developed by Cardinal Digital Entertainment, who are apparently no strangers to the world of fighting games with such past releases as the infamous Criticom and Dark Rift. Well, Criticom at the very least, we've never really heard of Dark Rift. Suppose it can't be too much better if it was part of what was dubbed the Trilogy of Terror, which could have been coined because the worlds made for these games being darker in tone, or because of the actual quality of them. And judging that Kronos is no longer with us, closing their doors sometime in 2002, it's safe to assume that it was the latter, which might not bode well for us once we actually start playing the game, but I guess we'll find that out soon enough. After taking a quick look at both of their previous additions to the genre, Cardinal Syn looks like they just took a lot from Dark Rift and just pivoted the setting to one of dark fantasy. Must have been because their 2 previous games, which were heavy with the science fiction, wasn't very popular, which I guess is fair. Fresh coat of paint, get away from the whole sci-fi universe thing, new perspectives and whatnot. Chrono's usual fighting game tag partner, Vic Tokai, apparently wasn't feeling a new perspective and dropped out of making video games in totality in 1997, after Dark Rift's release. It was the last game published by that company. Luckily for them, they happened to strike a deal with 989 Studios to develop another game, Cardinal Syn. Okay, so let's get the obvious out of the way real quick. The game was largely inspired by Namco's Soul Edge and Blade. That inspiration ran so deep that the team actually purchased an arcade cabinet of the game in order to play it in their studio. The final product does try to implement several of Soul Edge's systems and mechanics to interesting and varying results. The team also wanted to add things such as giving players the ability to knock weapons out of each other's hand, but since their studio had way more artists on hand than actual developers, ideas of those just had to remain just that. Speaking of art, Kronos decided to bring in professional sword fighters and stuntmen in order to perform the motion capture in this time, which was the first for the company. Before then, the employees themselves were the ones handling that aspect that was used in games like Dark Rift. The staff members were split into 3 different body types: small, medium, and chunked. Kronos staff would perform all the standard attacks and professionals would stand in to do the more complex ones. They wanted to achieve an animation quality similar to their inspiration, but found it difficult to do as they were learning on the fly. All in all, Kronos seemed to be pleased with the final result of the animation as a whole, as they believed they were on par with other American developers, but failed to stack up against their Japanese counterpart, aka Soul Edge. Upon release, Cardinal Syn gathered middle to negative reviews. Some reviews, like from Game Informer, RIP I guess, seems to be a bit more positive on the game than others, but that looks like the exception and not the rule. An early review of the game from Next Generation gave it a 2 out of 5 and called it a pretty, if confusing, waste of time and effort. Another early review from GamePro said Cardinal Syn isn't the kind of action sedative you need, especially in the middle of a heated match. The sin committed in this game is simple mediocrity. Damn, double the damage for that pun there. In an interview in 2004 with the founder of Kronos, the late Stanley Liu, over at GameCritics.com, has him reflecting a bit on his time developing Cardinal Syn and the other fighters in Kronos' library. The downside is that we're still living up to the "from the makers of Criticom" comment after all these years. Furthermore, we got stuck doing fighting games for a while simply because we were one of the very few US game developers that actually made a fighting game. Hence Dark Rift and Cardinal Syn. Looking back, we did what we had to do in order to survive and grow as a company. In many ways, without those titles, we would not have a chance to build up our technology and capability to create fair effect. So if it wasn't for their games like Cardinal Syn, the company would have never really had the chance to taste a little success with the likes of the awesome Fair Effect series. We should do a nostalgia towards about that. Which proves that even with colossal fuck-ups like Criticom and apparently Darkrift, lessons can be learned from it. Fair Effect would go on to have another sequel back in 2001 before Chronos closed shop, and then we all got to watch the series get mishandled by Square Enix several years later, which is now triggering me. So we'll just move on now.
So, Cardinal Syn's opening FMV tries to establish a very epic feeling with the narrator just dumping exposition at us, which is both somehow too much and not enough information. But instead of getting a story about souls and swords eternally retold, it's more like a story of war, MacGuffins, confusion, and a possible sex change. But jury's still out on that one. You look confused. Let me continue. The story takes place in a generic fantasy world, aka the Bloodlands, where several warring clans have an edge of their throat for quite some time, for generations in fact. When one day a mysterious old man known as the Wanderer suddenly appeared, and thanks to his book of infinite knowledge, or something, caused the fighting among the clans to cease. The Wanderer then summons all the leaders together, and then gave them each a scroll before disappearing. This apparently didn't sit right with the leaders, because they went right back to the fighting and the feuding as soon as he bounced. After an untold amount of time during a particularly nasty looking battle, yet another mysterious cloaked person randomly appears, carrying the same amulet the Wanderer once had, and that once again stopped the fighting. This woman went by the name of Syn. She gathers the clan leaders once again, but this time convincing them to hand over their scrolls so she could turn those 5 scrolls into 3 swords for whatever reason. Then she randomly declares, "It's tournament time, baby!" with each of the clans sending their strongest warrior as a representative. Once the winner emerges and goes looking for a reward, Syn suddenly goes on her villain arc and kills the guy. After that, she hasn't been seen in decades. Not until someone who was also random, couldn't have been Syn, she wasn't seen in decades, remember? Anyway, whoever it was that declared that it was tournament time again, everyone just goes with it, despite not hearing from the champion or Syn in years, or nothing really happening to the Bloodlands either. For a plot breakdown that lasts well into the 2-minute range, there is a shocking lack of information here. What are the clans warring over? One would assume it would be the lands itself, but it's never said. The big dumb magical wanderer in his big dumb book of peace, him leaving once he decides his teachings to finish, and decide to leave some type of knowledge to share among the now peaceful clans is fine, but why did they start fighting again? The narrator just said it's been peaceful for years. Why did Syn appear? What is her plan? Why did she take 5 scrolls and turn them into 3 swords? Doesn't it make them harder to read? Why did she kill the winner of the tournament that she started? Was it to fuel a continuous war? Then why not just do that? What do these swords do? Well, now you might be thinking, that's what their arcade mode endings are for. And yes and no. Unlike the intro, the other story segments to the game, both prelude and endings, aren't voiced, meaning all of these scenes are up to interpretation only. And to the game's credit, they almost seem like Twisted Metal endings with the story they were trying to tell, but it still come across as kind of confusing. Some endings like Bimorphia, Heckler, Plague, Thankster, Redemptor, and Vanguard, who might have the best ending in the game, are examples of stories that are actually good. According to PlayStation Museum Postmortem, the team believed that they nailed the environmental and character designs, and we're inclined to agree. The arenas are indeed varied in the looks department, and features a lot of interactive elements such as spikes, lava streams, and poisonous pools, with each of these arenas doing a fairly good job of being the home stage for its respective fighter. Speaking of the fighters, despite the world and the character designs leaning a bit more into the generic Dungeons & Dragons stereotypes, such as an elven warrior princess, forest sprites, zombies, abominations, and knights in shining armor, it will be safe to assume that these designs will be more on the bland side. Maybe. But to us, we like a lot of them, especially the absolute unit, literally concentrated testosterone in the helmet, Redemptor. which might be one of the sweatiest and coolest names for a fighting game character we've encountered in quite some time.
The music of Cardinal Syn is pretty sick, and we feel this is the closest aspect the game actually got to touching the coattails of Soul Edge. Not saying that it's better, but knowing what they were going for, you can definitely feel the energy with some of these tracks. Take the tragic Morphia, a victim of multiple horrific experiments at the hands of Syn, who just wanted to see what would happen if you combine a male and a female together. You know, for fun. The moaning of the other experiments and the sounds of rattling chains really sell the almost desperate feeling this track has. Take a listen. Let's hear the theme of our boy Redemptor, who is part of this clan who believes that the only true way to peace is to mercilessly kill anyone who they deem are evil. And the music associated with him really does a convincing job at telling you that this guy who we all know is crazy views these actions as heroic. And the bombastic organs backing up the track really fits a zealot like him. Okay, one more. Plague is a pretty cool character, being a witch doctor who studied the arts of rebirth and cell rejuvenation. And after being killed by invading soldiers, his research was used on his corpse, reviving him and becoming Plague. We're entirely not sure if Plague is a good or bad guy, and maybe that's the point. His grungy, hopeless sounding theme kind of breaks into a slightly hopeful feeling partway through. If there's anything that's the opposite of the much lighter, hopeful, and usually triumphant music of Soul Edge, Cardinal Syn's darker, depressing, defeatist collection of tracks would be it. I wouldn't be sitting here trying to essentially music study these with no clue on what that even is, if I didn't enjoy the soundtrack as much as I did.
Cardinal Syn is a pretty shallow game. Characters have a couple of special moves, which are just various combo strings in which they only have 2 or 3. These features attacks as their occasional combo finish ending with a pop-up or hard knockdown. Also, from our lab, and no character has something like a generic pop-up in their moveset, with most of the launching attacks becoming available after the 2nd or 3rd hit. And this is an issue because there is no natural combos in this game, which means until someone's guard meter is gone, matches will entirely consist of poking and throws. Compiling all that with the game's very strange parry mechanic and at times unresponsive controls, and matches can get pretty grueling to play pretty quickly. With all that aside, it's pretty simple stuff, especially for 1998, with juggernauts like Tekken 3 and Virtua Fighter 3 hitting the scene. Chronos must have noticed this and added in a few bells and whistles to make the moment-to-moment gameplay feel like the more than what's actually going on. So, before getting into what we feel are more important mechanics the game has to offer, let's tackle some of the smaller, less important elements first.
Most characters have some kind of projectile available to them, but only when they have magic stocked, except for Orion and Finster, who uses a bow and boomerang respectively. For everyone else, they can find magic pickups and chests scattered around the arena. These chests can also contain damage buffs, health pickups, and bombs. We didn't really use anything outside of the passive drops, and most of the projectile attacks are the same dinky looking fireball that can be easily avoided. Some characters such as Johnny has the ability to remove the arms of the opponent for a short time for her magical attack, and that's pretty neat, but the rest you'll find operate pretty similar to one another. So it's not really worth it running around the arena to try to seek these things out, other than just staying on top of the opponent after a knockdown and going for some kind of follow-up attack. Speaking of arenas, most will usually feature some kind of hazard that can damage both fighters at any given time. And by any given time, I mean all the fucking time. They constantly get in the way of the gameplay, and you'll both be getting knocked around from these more than each other when the slightest brush of a fire JPEG causes a hard knockdown. God, Heckler Stage is so fucking unplayable. You ever been zoned by bubbles not thrown by your opponent while trying not to get motion sick from a never-ending rotating stage? No? I have. It's beyond annoying and should be left off. Cardinal Syn also features fatalities, which are implemented strangely. In order to finish them, players will have to have at least 2 or 3 round wins on the opponent and then input a series of commands in order to chop off a head or a limb. This is confusing. It almost serves like a negative comeback mechanic that rewards the winner with a faster way of ending the round. Not only that, but these attacks are also tacked on at the end of some pretty normal looking combos, so there's no real grandeur to them or satisfaction with pulling one off. Sure, the camera will hit some fancy angles in order to try to sell you the killing blow, but it just happens and then you move on. I'm sure this wouldn't shock anyone just by looking at all the footage of the game, but Cardinal Syn is kinda weird to play. Like we said earlier, the game's inspiration lies in Namco's Soul Edge, so clearly a lot of its design sensibilities rear their head here, such as characters fighting with some kind of weapon, with their various attacks being separated into horizontal and vertical swings, and the basic movement feeling very similar to other 3D fighters at the time. Why'd I say basic movement? Well, we'll get into that in a few, but let's cover one of the more overt aspects that was carried over from Soul Edge.
Counterattacking is more or less a direct translation of the guard impact mechanics from Soul Edge, and it even can be done the exact same way, by pressing back or forward plus the guard button. This will cause the user to repel a swing and leaving the opponent open for a counterattack. Now, Cardinal Syn does have several unique takes on this. Players deciding to use a counterattack back option will knock the opponent away a good distance, and this might slam them into a nearby wall or hazard causing damage. Otherwise, if they don't run into anything during this action, no damage will be taken. Counterattacks can also be done from a crouching position to defend against lower attacks, but only the forward version will be available during this time. One of the more standout parts about Syn's take on guard impact is the fact that it can be done out of head stun, which is interesting because that means each attack can't be blindly mashed out, and players will have to constantly weigh the attacks they input. That's a pretty cool concept if it's done intentionally. The issue is that it's kind of overpowered. As stated before, combo strings don't naturally combo, not even with your quickest attacks, meaning that there's always a gap for a counter or a guard to take advantage of, which means matches just devolve into single poke, slowly stripping away at health bars until someone's caught lacking with the additional attack of a string. All this doesn't help with the overall slow speed of the game. Counterattacks are also inconsistent to boot. A character will perform a counterattack only to have nothing happen, and they look kinda dirt just standing there. We're unsure why this even happens, but it could be because of the very little active frames the move have. The thing is though, that the pose the character entered while counterattacking will still count as a guard. So is the move just not triggering? I guess the world will never know. Although returning to that developer insight, it's revealed Kronos at least knew this mechanic was very clunky.
Throws in Cardinal Syn take the form of these cute little universal shoves instead of the hyper unique animations that are usually found in other fighters. Pressing a direction while throwing will allow them to be aimed, and this can be used to knock the opponent into hazards or even off the wall, which actually leaves enough hit stun for a free hollow mix-up. But since the game doesn't have anything like single launching mids, it isn't anything to worry about. So be prepared to be shocked to learn that throws are still entirely broken. Throws are infinite on non-damageable walls. What do I mean? Well, if you manage to back your enemy into a wall that does nothing, usually one that shows some kind of slope, and start to throw them, it can be looped indefinitely from our research. There's just enough stun animation from the action to easily follow up with another throw. Now, they don't do damage, but it can be used to time scum on a life lead, but that's only part of why throws are utterly broken. To get to the second reason, we have to discuss, in our opinion, the most broken feature of this fighting game.
The roam button. This button allows characters to move in 3D space way faster than normal, and it is again extremely overpowered. Using it just makes it okay for characters to disengage effortlessly if there's little to no counterplay, as all the attacks are too slow to deal with the quicker movement it creates. There is technically no way of preventing someone from sitting on a life lead unless they get caught on a wall or snagged by some level geometry. Plus, everyone seems to be at the same speed while roaming, and that really doesn't help when trying to catch an opponent who's running away. Roaming will be the way to grab all those useless power-ups, which honestly makes the game feel like a really early arena fighter rather than a traditional 3D one. Okay, so circling back to throws, this is when they come back into play. Combining them with roam is utterly broken, because you can link together throws and carry the opponent across the screen. There is very little the opponent can actually do to prevent this outside of hoping for some type of missed timing, and that won't happen because it's stupidly easy to do. Using roam makes this possible on damaging walls now, which turns into a legit 100% damaging series of looping throws. Roaming really just feels like a tacked on gimmick more than a meaningful part of his gameplay. It would play a lot better without it. Not too much better, mind you, but definitely a lot less broken. We could be in the wrong here, but we feel as if it was a super late addition to the game, and we actually have a working theory going. Initially, we believe this was an attempt to emulate Soul Calibur's series to find an 8-way run movement system, but that might not have been the case, since Syn's earliest release was in the United Kingdom a month before Caliber, with the US version following almost the same time after. So this actually might be some type of coincidence. I mean, the two games are close enough that they might have heard wind of Soul Calibur's innovative take on 3D movement and decided to add it in that way. And I wouldn't be shocked to hear if that was the case. Once again, looking at PlayStation Museum post-mortem, they openly admitted that they were tweaking things like controls very late into development, so this also could mean that other elements such as the movement was being worked on as well. Just a theory.
So with everything said and done, does the final entry in Chronos' infamous trilogy of terror even deserve to fall into the same crowd as the likes of Criticom? No, we don't think so. At worst, the gameplay is just aggressively mediocre and underdeveloped. There isn't anything here that was going to turn anyone away from Soul Edge, Caliber, Virtua Fighter, Tekken, or even Fighting Lair. It might actually be better than this janky pair, Kensei Sacred Fist, but I don't think that's much of a hurdle to jump. So yeah, Cardinal Syn isn't too impressive, but that's definitely not from a lack of trying. It feels Chronos Digital actually tried to learn from their past failures and deliver on a good game here, and sometimes things just don't work out. That's just the way she goes. But it isn't all gloom and doom, however. There's a lot to like here. Most of it will come from its presentation, but a good point is still just that. And look man, I know Criticom is stinky, but I always felt that people were a bit too rough on it, with everyone being way too caught up in the fact that the game was bad to remember that it was not only their first fighting game, but the short-lived studio's first game ever. And Cardinal Syn, while not good, isn't entirely dookie, even with the massive problems with the gameplay, which shows a lot of growth. Besides, they eventually brought one of my favorite gaming series, Fear Effect, into existence, and that gave them something to rest their head on before shuffling away from this mortal coil, which proves you can't make an omelet without stiffly breaking a few eggs. We'll see you next time on The Runback.